Procedurally generated levels are awesome. By harnessing the power of maths, the game creates an entirely new world every time you play. As a game developer, I love the idea that my own game can surprise me. It really makes it feel like the game is alive. But the problem is, my procedurally generated levels suck. So let's fix that. Hi, my name's Luke Muscat. I created Fruit Ninja, Jetpack Joyride, and now I'm a solo indie developer. I'm currently building an underwater cave diving game with, you guessed it, procedurally generated caves. Like this, except, like filled with water. I was gonna shoot the whole video out here, but the cicadas are just going nuts. So I guess I'll just... We're back in the office, I guess. Such a bummer, I really wanted to record out there. Okay, so now I just need a good seg to remind you that we're talking about procedurally generated caves. So for my game, we need a big, complex 2D cave system for the player to explore and hopefully sometimes get lost in. There are heaps of ways to generate a cave system. Popular methods include using a wave function collapse and other smart things that I kind of don't understand. I originally wrote my system in less than a week and it is not smart. Not really any maths, no algorithms, just pure dumb chance. So let me show you how it works and why it sucks. So the system starts with an area that is just solid rock. And then we have these little cave sections and they're blue because that's where we're saying put water here. So we pick one of them randomly. You can flip it, rotate it randomly, and literally just slap it down. And then we pick another one and we do the same thing. And we just keep doing this. And pieces are just kind of overlapping and touching each other, but it slowly builds its way up into a big mess of a random cave system. And every time we do it, we get a really different result. This is what it looks like in the game. The game uses textures instead of the cardboard pieces to define where the water is, but otherwise it's the exact same idea. And this works just fine. Once we add some items and some enemies spawning, we have this big maze-like cave that we can explore. There are a few different problems with this, but the biggest one is that even though we have this big gnarly mess of a cave, it's just kind of not actually that interesting. It's mostly just a random mess of stuff without specific points of interest or special areas. But the best maps are the ones that have some overall structure to them. Like maybe there's a big dead end where you think you were going to get to the surface, but you couldn't actually make it. Or maybe there's a huge area that's cut off by a little tiny single tunnel. But right now, these really good maps are rare. And what I would really like in the future is to have some control. Like maybe there's a really specific little bit blocked off that needs a key to open the door. But right now, because everything is so haphazard, I have no control over any of that. So we need a new system. It needs to still make levels in a procedural way, so it's different every single time you play it. But there needs to be a little bit more control over the structure. And we need to have interesting points for the player to find and really kind of define their experience. So to start, let's break down how we're building these into a few different steps. All right, so forget this stuff, that's gone. Let's start with a simple 3x3 grid that defines where the cave is. And now let's kind of block in the outer walls. Instead of filling up the whole thing with just blank squares, let's fill it up with rooms that will connect everything together really nicely. So say in this corner, it connects to 2 other blank rooms. So let's put in this little L-shaped piece. On the side here, it connects to 3 other rooms, so we can use this T-shaped piece. And it's the same for the rest of these, using the same pieces, but just rotated. And then in the middle here, obviously it connects 4 ways, so we have this little 4-way connector piece. This piece can actually also be a 4-way connector because that's where the base is going to be, where the player can upgrade their stuff and refill their air. And if we had a really small grid, like say a 1x3, you might also need a dead end piece and a 2-way connector piece that's straight. So all up, there's just 5 different kinds of pieces that let us make any kind of grid we want. Now this time, before we fill in the rooms, let's add 3 additional walls, just randomly around. These walls are what's going to make up the overall structure of the cave. And now this time, we can fill it in again, but again, making sure we only connect adjacent rooms. Now, this isn't a cave system worthy of the game just yet, but bear with me here, because now we're going to bring this all together by having some much more interesting shapes for the rooms. Right now, these are just rooms with like blank outlines. Let's say we have like an interesting corner piece, and when we drop it in, it still connects the whole cave system together. And you can see now that these big walls are going to provide that overall structure that the previous system was sorely lacking. Does any of that make sense? I sure hope so. And obviously we could make a bunch of interesting shapes for each of the 5 room types, and then when we put that all together, it's really going to come together into an interesting cave system. I got sick of cutting up cardboard pieces though, so now let's switch to me getting this all working in the game. How about we condense like 2 weeks worth of work into, I don't know, 10 seconds of montage? Ta-da, it works! It's so much more impressive when you see it all happen so fast. Like, you don't see my cursor just sitting there blinking while I try and figure out what the hell I'm doing. So let's see what's actually going on here. First up, if you look at the cave carefully here, you can see the same thing as my cardboard shapes. We have a 3x3 grid with 3 walls added, and then we fill in each grid with a room that has an interesting shape that connects to the adjacent rooms. And we can generate so many different caves. Now for the rooms, obviously they're not made out of cardboard, but instead they're defined by these little textures. The blue pixels in the texture basically say, hey, put a tile of water right here. But we can do something a bit smarter with the textures that we couldn't do with the cardboard. If there was only a handful of shapes to pick from, it would start looking pretty repetitive after a while. So our options here is we could make like hundreds of shapes so you never really notice any repetition or patterns, or we can bring some actual randomness to the shapes themselves for the rooms. So when we draw the room textures, instead of just having a full blue pixel which says, definitely put water here, we can also have some darker blue pixels. How bright or dark these pixels are in the blue channel helps the game decide how probable it is that we're going to put water there. So this section that's half brightness in the blue channel, it's 50-50 if that will be water or wall. So using lots of different values, we can have a single texture produce many different room outputs. We just have to make sure that the endpoints are always connected with 100% blue to make sure we don't accidentally cut off any rooms. We can also do things like use the red channel to mark out areas where we don't want any game objects to spawn. This is handy for any special rooms that have big set pieces in them in the future. Was I supposed to be looking at the camera for that? Because I don't know if I have footage to. So with all that working, now let's just make a bunch of these for each of the 5 shapes. Would this be easier with a custom tool made in Unity? Maybe. But this method is super easy to work with, and it means I can just smash away in my image editor to generate lots of interesting room shapes super quickly, and it's easy to see them all in the one place. Alright, so we have our grids being generated nicely, but now we can kick it up another notch. Let's delete one of the bottom walls that defines the edge of our grid, and then we can connect it to an entirely new grid. In the future, we would be able to make each grid completely different, like maybe they're different biomes, which is something that a lot of people had suggested in the comments on some of the previous videos. But we could also connect the grids in completely different ways at different locations and with different sizes. And now we can have wildly different shaped cave systems. Like maybe it's super flat with lots of different pockets underneath, or a deep cave with little side branches, or still just a big crazy cave. And all up, this creates so much more variety than the old system, with the benefit of having that layer of control and creating those very interesting overall structures, which makes navigation way more perilous. Now granted, there is an organic complexity to the old cave system that looks really good when you're zoomed out in the editor. But when you're actually in the game, which is much more punched in and has all the dynamic lights, the new ones are way more interesting to navigate. In fact, I have this really good story about why you shouldn't worry about what your level looks like when it's just in the editor. So the year is 2000 and that's the end of my long story about that. And now with everything working, we have a super powerful new procedural. I mean, is this really even procedural? It's more just like a randomization engine. Is that different? Is that the same? Anyway, whatever it is, it's really effective at making really interesting random levels that surprise me and trap me all the time. Like pretty often when I'm playing and I'm trying to debug something, I end up kicking back out to the scene because I'm like, oh, it's totally broken because I can't find this object, or I'm totally lost, it must have been broken. But no, it's just really good at tricking me. All up, this is a really similar system to what Spelunky uses to generate its levels. And I'm sure heaps of other games as well. But yeah, overall, I'm really happy with how it works, and it just gives me so many options to kind of balance the randomization versus me having a really specific structure in mind. And I can't wait to start plugging in cool new biomes, crazy set pieces like, I don't know, an entire sunken ship off in a side cave. The code for this is a massive beast of a thing. Since I made it, I've already had to kind of go back and mess with it a few times, and oh boy, like it does not all fit into my brain at once. But again, it works great. So I actually finished all of this way back in August, so that's like 4 or 5 months ago, depending on when I actually get to editing this thing. And I've made several other huge changes to the game since then. It's really coming along really well, but I'm gonna save all that for a future video. I kind of promised myself I'm not going to make like another 45-minute epic, but that's going to have stuff like there's a whole new control system, new enemies. It's like so cool. I'm super excited. But in the meantime, if you want a little bit of a preview, I've actually updated the Steam page and trailer. And hey, while you're there, you can wishlist the game. Please wishlist the game. My plan is for this thing to be done about the middle of the year. I'm kind of guessing like July, August. And I have so many plans for the game between now and then. One of them, which I'm super excited about, is I'm working on the soundtrack with none other than Cedar Jones, who is the guy who did the Jetpack Joyride soundtrack. It's gonna be fun. And yeah, also subscribe because I'll be talking about all of that, and comment, all the things. Yeah, okay, bye.